Hi everyone, I wanted to show you me repainting this Halloween decoration. I got this from TK Maxx this week and it only cost me a £5, but I was like, I was not a fan of some of the way it was painted. Like, I was not a fan of the purple. I love purple, don't get me wrong, but not this purple. I felt that the skull could have, and the beard and everything could have more detail, and there was like no shading on it and very sort of basic paint job on it. Don't get me wrong, it looks fine, but I thought I'll have a go and see if I can improve it. So the first thing I did was paint the hat black. I wanted the little gnome dude to be in all black clothing, including his little hat. I just think it would fit more with the Halloween theme. Because normally, like, colours that I'd associate with Halloween would be like black, orange, red, that sort of colour. So that's the colours I decided to use for the colour scheme for this little guy. So the first thing I did, paint his hat, and then I went over his body with the same black just so it would match and wouldn't look weird once it was dry. And then I went in all the little nooks and crannies around the bottom of the figure, just to get rid of where the orange had been painted over the top of him. Because all that was wrong with a lot of this was like where different parts of the design met, there was like paint like bleeding over onto the wrong area. So I just touched up all that first of all, and like even like on the front of the pumpkin, you see there's a little bit of purple where the paint smudged, and that sort of thing. I decided I wanted to give him nice bright red little boots. Unfortunately, my red paint is rubbish. It's a cheaper red paint compared to the other colours I've got, and it goes on quite sort of see-through. So it took 3 coats actually to do the red boots, but I was really pleased with them once they were completed. And I mean, you could like paint the whole thing black, I suppose, and put some of the colours on, but it's going to make some of the colours dull, and I wanted these little boots to show up quite bright, so that's why I just painted directly over the lilac colour. As you can see, they look a bit odd at the minute, but later on, once I've done a couple of coats, you'll see that the boots match and they're nice, and they're a nice bright red. And then the next thing I'm doing here is mixing a flesh tone colour in a pale flesh tone, which is what he already had, like his little nose and everything. And I just wanted to match the colour of his nose and hands. But obviously you can paint your gnome whatever skin tone you prefer. And here I'm just going over his nose, getting rid of where a bit of black smudged, and also going around the hands where the paint was missed first of all in the factory, and also just to neaten up around the edges and everything, just to make it nice and like a nice even paint job. And you can see on the end of the sleeve there where the skin tone was actually painted over the sleeve. So I took some black paint and just went over the edge of the sleeve. It just makes the hand look like it's coming from in the sleeve instead of actually sort of stuck on top, if you get what I mean. And I went around any edges where the sleeves hadn't been painted and around the edge of the hat, just getting that all nice and neat. I did have to go back over some of these areas a couple of times when I painted different colours. So I suppose what you could do is paint the whole thing and then touch up all the edges afterwards, but I'd rather do it step by step, because then it saves having to try and mix colours later on to match the colours I'd originally painted the thing. Because obviously by the time you finish the painting the gnome, all the paint's dry and everything, and it's just easier if you do the edges, in my opinion, as you go along. So as you can see here with the second coat of red on the boots, they're already starting to look a lot better. And what I did for the skull, the original paintwork on the skull, it was just painted white. There was no black in the eye sockets or the nose, so I added that. And then I touched up all the white because that sort of like put like a sort of speckle on the skull, but it just looked like a sort of speckly blob in the middle of the top of his skull. So I painted over that in white, and later on I'm going to put shading and everything on to make the details of the skull stand out. Because for such a little sculpt, the little skull, it's got a lot of detail on it with like the teeth and everything. So I'll make that show up later on. It's a shame that the detail wasn't made to show up earlier. Then I decided I wanted my little dude to have a grey beard. And this is the first layer of grey, just to cover the white and start to dull it down a bit. I did decide in the end that this wasn't dark enough because this is the colour I wanted to use to sort of dry brush later on. So you'll see at some point that I actually go over the grey again and make it a lot darker. So all the dry brushing will show up later on. Because again, in the beard, there's like quite a lot of detail carved into it. Well, sculpted into it. And it's a shame that that detail wasn't taken advantage of when it was painted in the factory. But obviously, at the end of the day, they're going to just paint like probably 100 of them in like a day or something. So there isn't really time for detail and dry brushing and stuff, I suppose. But one thing I do like about these cheap little resin figures that you get from TK Maxx is they are fun to repaint and they're easy to repaint, and you can make a lot of difference with them. And then you can make something that's like really cheap look like it's something you would have spent like double the money on. So that's one thing I like about these. I will keep an eye out and see if I can find some more, but the TK Maxx I got this from basically is closing down, so it only had like 4 Halloween things left. And this was the best out of 4. There was like a random skull with like a sort of Roman type helmet on with spikes, which was naff. There was a sort of Day of the Dead lady like skull, but it wasn't very good. And I thought, well, when it's painted, it's just going to look like another skull, and I've got enough of those. And then there was some like blown glass pumpkins, which looked quite nice. But I didn't like them enough to pay like 14 quid for them. So I'll keep an eye out for the smaller ones at the other TK Maxx I go to. But they're nice as they are. But if I can get some more little figures like this, I know there's like some witch figures and like cats and stuff. But again, the TK Maxx by me has been pretty picked over by now. The last couple of times I've went, there's only really sort of 2 sets of shelves with stuff on, and I've got basically my favourites out of that. But I will have another look. And then this is where I made the beard darker, because once it was dried, it wasn't quite as dark as I wanted. So I just added another layer of grey over the top with a little bit more black mixed into it. And that will be a lot better, much better base coat for the beard, because I want that detail to stand out. So I need like a dark colour in all the little nooks and crannies. So obviously that's why I went for this shade of grey. I found it's easy to do sort of like the bulk of an area in my slightly bigger brush, and then for the very edges, to get it like super duper neat, I went over around the edges with my teeniest brush. As you can see here, I'm just touching up edges and anywhere where I've gone over. I found that was the easiest way of painting all of this, especially just above the skull. There was like a very tiny area of beard, and it was a pain to get to. 9 times out of 10, you'll see when I actually paint in that area, I end up getting paint on the skull and have to either wipe it or touch the paintwork up. It was quite awkward getting into this little area, as you can see. But I found if you get paint on another area, as long as you wipe it off fairly quick, it'll come off, obviously. Especially if you use like a little baby wipe or a damp cloth, you can get the paint off before it dries if it goes into the wrong area. And then worst comes to the worst, you just got to touch up the paintwork on where you've wiped off the spilt paint. And then here I'm adding a second layer to the hat because it just needed a little bit more paint just to make it completely covered, because if I caught it right in the light I could still see a little bit of the purple through, and I just wanted to make sure that was all covered. And then I was touching up where I'd accidentally gone over with the beard colour. And you'll see a couple of times I use the heat gun. It's a good idea to dry the layers in between, and because it's acrylic paint, if you blast it with the heat gun for a few seconds, it dries it really quickly, especially if the paint's fairly thin. And it just means I can get on to the next stage quite quickly without having to leave it for half an hour to dry off completely. When it's summer it does dry off quite quick, but I wanted it to dry off like fairly instantly. And then here I'm just touching up the hands where some of the grey had gone on the hands. And there's like a little fault in the sculpt of this one, so there's like a little hole in the thumb of the one hand. So I have to keep putting paint in there until it covered it up, because obviously having the inside of the hole dark made it show up a lot more. It's just to disguise that little fault in the resin. It's like some form of resin, this stuff is. And then I dry brushed a light grey over the top of the beard, and as you can see it just starts to make that detail show up a lot more. I did dry brush it a couple of times, and then eventually after I finished recording I actually took my very fine brush and just did little lines for like little hairs on the beard, just to add some little bright highlights. And I made sure that there was more sort of like the lighter highlights in the centre of the beard to make it show up a bit more. The orange of the pumpkin was pretty good, but I wanted it to be a little bit deeper. And as you can see, the advantage, because I've dried the gnome with the heat gun, I can hold the sculpture by the gnome now, so I can paint the pumpkin. Because before I was using obviously the pumpkin as a place to hold the model while I painted the rest of it. And my brush was a little bit dirty, and I've got orange and yellow mixed together, but because there was a little bit of like a sort of browny colour on my brush, only a hint of it, that mixed in with the red and orange obviously gives you this nice sort of I don't know, deeper pumpkin colour with a little bit of texture and shading and stuff accidentally thrown in. And the eyes and the mouth, I wasn't chuffed with them being yellow. I could see where they were going, because what they were trying to do is make it look like the pumpkin was glowing, but it didn't really work. So what I did was painted the eyes, nose and mouth black on the inside, but you'll see what I do is I actually leave like a little bit of yellow around the edges of all the black areas to add some more depth to the pumpkin, like to make it look like the skin on the pumpkin's thicker as opposed to it just all looking flat. If you can't, sorry you can't quite see it on camera, I kept going out of shot on this little bit, but you'll see in a bit when I show you. So can you just about see there's the black, and then you've got like a little yellow, like where the edge of the sculpt is, where it goes into where the black area is. I left the yellow showing so it would make it look a bit more, I don't know, make the pumpkin look a bit more 3D, I suppose. And see how with that mouth, having that yellow bit really makes the surface of the pumpkin stand out away from the black area in the middle. And I also add some more yellow around, and I also add the yellow to the eyes and the nose, which you'll see me do a little bit later on. And you'll see what I do in a bit is after I've touched up the eyes and the mouth and made sure all the areas inside the mouth are completely covered, I mix a little bit of brown with the orange colour that I made and use that to shade in between where the sort of segments of the pumpkin are. And I also went over anywhere where the grey of the beard had gone over the pumpkin. So here's where I add the brown, and you can see I'm just using that in the creases. I want to shade these areas to give the pumpkin more definition, and see how by just adding that little bit in the middle, it already makes the segments of the pumpkin stand out a lot more. And I just blended the edges with my finger. I found that worked easier. And what I liked, it was kind of like a slightly streaky effect, which just adds to the texture of the skin of the pumpkin. And then I went over any areas where I wanted it darker, and it just makes those sections stand out a lot more. And I also use this shading around the gnome, because obviously if he's sitting on top of it, there's going to be a shadow created. And I made sure I went round the back of the gnome as well and put the shading under where he's sitting. It just makes it look like he's sitting on there more, because obviously you get a shadow if you're sitting on top of a piece of on top of a pumpkin. And then I mixed a lighter shade just for little highlights here and there, just to like touch up. So basically where each segment of the pumpkin is, like in the centre, I dry brushed this sort of yellowy colour on, just again to add variations, because no pumpkin is like a solid orange colour. It's always like a bit of a mixture of colours. Like if you look at it and the light catches it, it looks a bit more sort of yellowy in the centre of the sections where the light catches. And I did go over the yellow areas around the mouth and then added them to the eyes and nose. My yellow paint's rubbish though, so it takes like 3 coats to do it. But it did look a lot better in the end once it was done. It just makes it so it looks like that skin's nice and thick on the pumpkin. And I think this little gnome dude looks a lot better dressed all in black with a nice dark grey beard. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.